Welcome. This session is hosted by RIEEE. So we hear people all over campus think about how many E's. It's a research institute for environment, energy, and economics. For anybody who does not know that off the top of your head, we're so thrilled to be hosting this session. It's going to be highlighting the great work of our CONCERT awardees. And so you're going to hear research that spans a lot of different things, transdisciplinary research, really creative stuff, all getting at advancing sustainability research across campus. I'm Christine Hendren. I am, as of a year and a month ago, the director of RIEEE, and still feeling new, thrilled to be here, thrilled to work with all these wonderful people. Many of you have already had the pleasure of working with. And so, Grace, do you want me to share? I think you might be ready to share your screen. Before I hand it off to Grace Plummer, who is the administrator for the CONCERT award program, I'm just going to give, since I haven't had a chance to really do a campus-wide introduction, just a really quick overview of the RIEEE, and just as it pertains to some of our mission that really kind of touches on the CONCERT program. So with that, I am ready for the next slide. Okay, so the RIEEE, as many of you may know, is structurally made up of the Institute, where I mentioned I'm director, and we have 3 centers within the RIEEE. Each of them have a director as well, who you see pictured here. So there's one for each E. Southern Appalachian Environmental Research and Education Center, SAREC, Appalachian Energy Center, and Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis, which is SERPA. And you see the directors, Steve Siegel, Jamie Russell, and Ash Morgan here. We like to say that these are kind of the structural home for a lot of the missions in RIEEE, but it doesn't describe the entirety of everything that we might tackle as we advance sustainability research. So the other people that make RIEEE happen and are extremely integral to our mission are a mixture of research development and programming staff and scientific staff. So Grace Plummer, who you'll hear from next, is research development specialist, and she does all kinds of things to help support working groups and teams as you build momentum toward your own research vision. Caitlin McNeely, thanks to her, we're actually able to administer all the grants that run through our institute and centers, and she is an incredible problem solver, a great communicator, and lovely person to work with. So many of you have figured this out already. We have Janet Miller is our outreach coordinator, and she, or manager, and she runs most of the Energy Center programming that happens, workshops, all kinds of things that she's built. So lucky to have those folks. And then we have Gregg Marland, who is actually one of our presenters today. Lucky enough to have him as an adjunct research professor and research scientist in our institute. We have a postdoc, Rodrigo Mercado Fernandez, who works with the Energy Center. And we also have Hei-Young Kim, another one of our presenters, who is integral to the Nexus work and lots of Energy Center research. We also have this dotted line because we just want you to be continuing to think creatively. We are looking at different mechanisms to partner with different parts of campus to house scholars that might take a time to research with us with one of our centers. We have a little bit of space to host these scholars if they would rotate through, and just, you know, keep that on your radar for all of you who are working so hard to build big research programs. Okay, so what are we here for? You've probably seen the RIEEE mission stated a bunch of different ways over the time that you have been here, most of you longer than I. But we like to say that RIEEE centers can, and the centers connect, support, and amplify research that all of you are the engine behind. And we do this throughout App State on environment, energy, economics, and the equity that must underpin sustainable solutions to any of those. So we think of that as kind of a fourth E that is critical to our work too. And also all of their complex intersections. That's really where our IEEE tries to help strengthen transdisciplinary approaches. So we want to help increase the impact of your research, and increase your capacity to do more and bigger to the extent that, you know, that's part of your vision. We want to help elevate the App State profile, connect nationally and internationally, and generate collaborative opportunities that help leverage everything that you're all doing. And then there are really some areas that we are poised as a university and as sustainability specialists in a variety of domain spaces to lead. And so there are some priority areas of sustainability research that RIEEE, the centers, and then all of you are helping us show that we really can be a place that people look to, like App State, that's where they're doing it right. So we're on the lookout for that. So with that in mind, what we do, part of what we do is these concert grants. And I think of the concert grants as like the seed, right? So literal seed funding. And so what I want to introduce is just a flavor of what the RIEEE working group support services and resources that we're working to build up will do to kind of water that seed and help you grow the seed funding. Our mission is for it to become something bigger, become its own program, whatever that looks like for your domain space. And so we've outlined a little bit of what the working group support functionalities will look like to help these concert grants in all of your efforts. So thinking of this isn't everything that we can do that is that might help research grow, but it is the most relevant to these concert teams and awardees who have really already shown some great momentum. So we've kind of boiled down our working group model into 3 buckets that are most important for what we're developing right now. And this is not a rollout, this is an invitation to our planning process and our development process. So there's room for you all to help us kind of decide what's priority. I also think it's a good time to mention that we work really closely with grants, resources, and services to ensure that, you know, we're not duplicating efforts, we're concentrating our efforts. So there may be things that you need to help your research grow that you fit within RIEEE, but you actually find this service is much better presented and offered through grants, resources, and services. So think of us as a team. In your mental buffer, we can all go in the same kind of cloud. But our working group model has one thing that we have really tried to focus on is institutionalizing RIEEE student research opportunities. A lot of times this just looks like giving something a name, something that's already happening, but when we name it and officialize it, then it builds a cohort culture across students. It can allow visibility and credit for their CVs and for within your departments and your colleges. It also, as we develop some tools, can help with a shared foundation of mentoring that will assist kind of across the mentors of the teams as well as the students, and then position us for bigger things. There are REU grants, training grants. There aren't places that do undergraduate, in particular, research as well as App State. I mean, this is just such a strength of this university, and we want to help that shine and help that get us more research dollars. We also, as we've worked with some of you already, have worked to build up shared infrastructure. So when we understand things that multiple teams might be able to use in terms of social networks, in terms of data and informational infrastructures or physical infrastructures like the farm or a microscope or something, then we can kind of look for ways to leverage it and stack our successes. And then we're also just rolling out some shared services, strategic planning help, ideation, strategy help for working group teams that'll probably be customized to each working group and what you need and where you are. And just be on the lookout for that. We will invite all of you to all of that process. And I think that's it for me. Thank you. And I apologize, I'll have to probably watch back most of your talks later, but I'm really looking forward to a fantastic program. All right, Grace, over to you.
Great, thank you, Christine. Good morning, I'm Grace Plummer. I am in a research development role, as Christine mentioned earlier, in RIEEE, and I just recently became the official administrator of the CONCERT program, and it's been around for quite a while. I actually was in Caitlin's position, post-award administration, when we started it in 2013. We've had changes in leadership during the last 8 years, but this is one program that RIEEE has been very consistent with. The funding priorities have changed over the years, but it's leading to some really interesting outcomes, and there are great things on the horizon. I wanted to give a quick, and this is really interesting for us, I think, this process of looking back at what we've done with CONCERT over the years. So I should first credit Gregg Marland, who is here on the call, I think, with a complex acronym for complex work. So it actually stands for Conducting Complex Research Together, CONCERT. So in 2013, we started it. We've had 8 competitions since, and have granted over $200,000. The really remarkable thing in looking back at this is supporting 68 different faculty members representing 21 departments and across 4 colleges and RIEEE, the Energy Center, and CARE. That kind of reach across campus is exactly the sort of thing that RIEEE was founded for. And we're really doubling down now on trying to hone the priorities as a seed funding program, how we want to track those, and what are the metrics that we really want to pay attention to be able to report on and amplify the impact of the CONCERT program. So looking at things, how many students have CONCERT grants supported? Where are they going after? What are they involved in? What are the funding proposals and awards that come out of work seeded by CONCERT grants? So for the FY21 competition, we received 9 proposals requesting over $60,000. We only had half that, but we were able to award the 5 that are represented here today, and the total is just shy of $30,000 worth of awards. There are 15 faculty members supported by the FY21 cohort, but they're not all here presenting today. We have 1 and sometimes 2 representing an award, but you'll be able to see who all was involved in some of the slides down the line. But we still have 9 departments represented and 4 colleges again. There are 4 CONCERT first timers this time around, which is great to see as well. So we're attracting more proposers, and that's exactly the sort of thing we want to do. I also want to acknowledge that the last presentation today, you'll hear from Sandi Lane and Adam Hege. This was first, we co-funded this with the Institute, the Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina Institute for Health and Human Services in the College of Health Sciences. So that kind of reaching across the boundaries and silos on campus is what we intend to do, and this was a great example of it. So the overview for today, this is everyone that we'll hear from, and I don't want to waste too much time, I guess, talking about RIEEE and the CONCERT program, but give an opportunity really to showcase the work that this cohort of CONCERT grantees have been able to achieve. So without further ado, I'll jump right into that. And oh, sorry, I do want to, we have 2 ways today that we'd like to collect some information from you all. So if you're more comfortable using the chat, you can put questions, comments, things like that in the chat. We also have this doc that I just shared in the chat as well, where we will put all the chat questions in here eventually in the end, but if you're comfortable with it and want to jump in and put a comment, a question, a collaboration idea, this is just more fodder for us to think and have a takeaway from an event like this that we can do something with. So, and for those of you that are curious, I'll put this other past concert competition information on our website so that you can take a look there and see the changes in the RFP over time, the different groups awarded and so forth. Okay, so our first speaker today is Suzanna Brauer. Trying to say, I used to say Susanna's name incorrectly all the time. Suzanna is a professor in biology, and she was awarded a concert grant to work on a project that was also supported by a Fulbright award. So I will stop sharing and let Suzanna share her screen and get started.
All right, hopefully everyone can see that screen. Can you all hear me and see that? Okay, so great. Today, thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for supporting my project. I will be talking about small microorganisms of the domain Archaea that make methane in peat that is present either in wetlands, also known as peatlands, or these big mounds of peat that are found in frozen permafrost soils in the Arctic. And these are called Arctic pulsas, these big mounds of peat. And this is important to the society and the entire globe because these sites are sources of methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas with over 30 times the radiative forcing compared to CO2. And they currently store huge amounts of carbon. It's equivalent to roughly 60% of total atmospheric carbon found in just 4% land area. So if these peatlands were to decompose and release this carbon in the form of CO2, or worse yet as methane, it could nearly double the amount of carbon in our atmosphere. So this could have huge implications for climate change. And part of the reason why this small land area is able to store such large amounts of carbon is due to the extremely low rates of decomposition. So you can see here images of this Tolen man that was buried in peat in Denmark for over 2,000 years. And you can still make out the hair on his head and the rope around his neck. So these sites are saturated with water, they have low pH, and they have extremely low decomposition rates. So all the plant matter from the net primary productivity over the year doesn't decompose, and it's stored in the form of poorly decomposed plant material, also known as peat. That's why they're called peatlands. So I'm interested in the decomposition processes. So the organic matter anaerobically is first hydrolyzed and fermented by bacteria, and they produce hydrogen and acetate, which are the precursors for methane. So this is produced either by hydrogenotropic methanogens or by acetoclastic methanogens. So these are small microorganisms, as I mentioned, from the domain Archaea. So these are separate from bacteria and eukarya. And some of our findings so far, I'm really, really excited about. I think it has huge funding potential. So on the right, you see this figure from a former student of mine, James Seward, and this is very common type of data that you would see looking at microorganisms across really any type of soil. It's really well known. I think Noah Feuer from Duke was one of the first to publish in PNAS that pH is a huge driver for microbial communities in soils. Well, if you pull out just the Archaea, so we're looking at the specific gene, it's called methyl coenzyme M reductase. We're looking at subunit A, MCR-A gene. It's diagnostic for methane metabolism. And if you look only at that group of microbes, only the methanogenic Archaea, what you see is that pH actually is not such a major driver. Instead, nickel is a major driver for those methanogenic communities throughout these peatlands. So why is this so exciting? Nickel is actually a required cofactor in the enzyme that makes methane. And it has been shown in the laboratory and in anaerobic digesters that nickel is super important trace element for these organisms. But no one's ever shown it in the field that it actually drives these microbial communities. Not only that, but it spans 4 orders of magnitude when you're looking at different peatlands around the globe. So I'm really excited about this finding. So here's just a look at different methanogenic pathways. You can see that methanogens can make methane from acetate or from methanol or for methylamines. And we're looking, so I have this diagram to kind of show you that we're honing in on this one enzyme, methyl coenzyme M reductase, responsible for production of methane. So this is the primary gene that we've been more recently using to determine what's happening in these communities. And before I left for my Fulbright, as part of preparation for the project, I started collaborating with some of my collaborators over in Finland, and we started scanning the databases, looking for organisms that contain this gene of interest. And we had some really exciting results even before I got over to Finland. So we found that if you look for any sequences from any fens or bogs, these are 2 types of peatlands around the globe, what kind of MCRA or methyl coenzyme M reductase gene diversity can you find? And the most exciting finding, we had a lot of other findings, but the most exciting finding was that we found these really unusual genes that are found in this uncultured group of Bathyarchaeota. So these are present in fairly high abundance in some peats, but it has not been known that they might be potentially cycling methane in these sites. So we're really excited to learn more about this particular group. And we found other groups that are maybe somewhat related to Bathyarchaeota, but may represent a totally new group as well. And this represents a collaboration of many researchers. Actually, it's even part of an even broader group called the Global Peatland Microbiome Project, which represents over 50 different collaborators, but I'm more closely associated with collaborators in Finland at the University of Eastern Finland, where I carried out my Fulbright, some researchers at Laurentian University in Canada, at Cornell University in New York, and then here at App State as well. And during my Fulbright, I was fortunate to be able to go to Kilpisjärvi, which is in the Arctic region of Finland, and I was able to sample collapsing pulses. So as I mentioned, these pulses are giant mounds of peat that are melting, and so I was able to go and collect samples. So you can see these giant mounds here, and we are in the process of carrying out targeted sequencing on the MCRA gene using these samples. And what this is, so typically when you sequence from an environment, there's a lot of different genes, and the methanogenic archaea are not necessarily in high enough abundance, even though they play a huge role functionally, to where you can actually see what's happening with them. So we're using a targeted type of method that was developed in Austria. Actually, my collaborator in Finland traveled to Austria to learn this technique. And there are probes that will attach to the DNA, so they hybridize to the DNA pieces that you're interested in, and they're biotinylated, so you can pull them down with streptavidin beads, wash away any undesired DNA sequences that you don't want to sequence, and then you end up with a pool of only your gene of interest, which in this case, of course, is the MCRA gene. So we're really excited to see what these results will show. Those are currently being sequenced, and we don't quite have those data yet. So our overall goals for this project are to understand what's happening with these greenhouse gas producers. How is the diversity changing, and how does this impact the amount of methane that's being released across 4 orders of magnitude of nickel concentrations? And this is really important for climate modeling. All of the climate models to date include what are called plant functional types, but they don't include microbial functional types. And they really should, because these guys are the canaries in the coal mine that are going to be the first to respond to climate change and will dramatically shift how much carbon is going to be decomposed and released to the environment. It's really important for that fate of the carbon that is stored in these peatlands. So I have a lot of people to thank, including all my hosts during my Fulbright, including the folks at Fulbright Finland that helped organize this, collaborators at Cornell and Laurentian University, in addition to those at University of Eastern Finland, and funding sources from RIEEE, Department of Energy's Joint Genome Institute, and Fulbright Finland. So thank you guys. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. It's fascinating. We are running a little past time, but Susanna has a meeting she has to run to shortly. So if there are some burning questions, I'd like to make a little time for them here. Okay. Well, you're welcome. If anything comes to mind after, you're welcome to put it into that doc that I shared, and I'll share that again here in a moment for those of you that may have joined late. Thank you so much, Susanna. It's fascinating. I wish I had been in Finland this summer as well, and so glad that you got to go in the current context. Okay, so I also want to, I'm going to introduce the next speaker in just a second, but I want to acknowledge that Christine Hendren also has to leave in a little bit. I know she'll be with us soon, but it may be during this next presentation. She is presenting at a conference here shortly. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. Okay, so our next speakers are Rebecca Witter. Rebecca is an assistant professor in sustainable development, and Dana Powell, who's actually joining us from Taiwan, who's an associate professor in anthropology. They represent an award that Shea Tuberty, biology, and Carol Babiak, chemistry and fermentation sciences, were also a part of. And I think they're both with us here today, but Rebecca and Dana will be representing this group. And I will go ahead then and stop share. And Rebecca, I'll hand it over to you if you're ready.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Bear with me for a second as I navigate my screen share. Oops. Act like you don't see that. This is where I'm starting. Okay, can folks see my screen and hear me okay? Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me. Again, I'm Rebecca Witter from the Department of Sustainable Development, presenting on behalf of my team, and especially Dana Powell, who's here now. I'm glad you're here, Dana. But I'll be the main speaker for today until we get to the question part. But I'm starting with this collaboration slide, first and foremost, to underscore the spirit and the real work that occurred with support of RIEEE in the spring semester. So this is the Eastern North Carolina Environmental Justice Collaborative, or the EJ Collab, that was formed due to support from the RIEEE. So much to say about each of these folks and about our relationship together, but briefly, Donna Chavis, Jeff Curry, Mac Ledgerton, Danielle Melvin Koontz, Sherry White Williamson, Carol Babiak, Dana, Shea Tuberty, Courtney Woods, myself, and then a lot of graduate student and undergraduate student engagement as well. So again, the work of this award has been to build this collaboration and a process of knowledge co-production. So again, the title of our project, which is ongoing, is Social Infrastructures of Resilience, Biomass, Biogas, and Community-Based Responses to Socio-ecological Harm. And for some background, energy derived from timber, namely compressed wood pellets, constitutes biomass. While methane, so I was very interested to talk more about Susanna about this, but while methane generated from the waste of industrialized hog farming constitutes biogas. So advocates champion these methods as sustainable and renewable technologies, offering wood pellets as clean alternatives to coal, and biogas as a way to make the infamously noxious hog waste economically valuable and environmentally more palatable. Yet these new energy development projects are highly contested by a diverse swath of residents. Those who would be impacted directly by the negative consequences of these projects for being only superficially green, and for threatening to entrench high-risk agricultural industries in Eastern North Carolina and to accelerate climate disaster. So in this context, our research questions were driven by 3 primary sources. First, preliminary ethnographic research that Dana and I conducted in the fall of 2020 with more than 20 environmental justice leaders across Eastern North Carolina. Some of you may know that this region is considered the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. We were taking a contemporary tour with these leaders. And from those that we got to learn with, we gathered that the co-production of knowledge, including through improved university-community relationships, a deep desire to protect water, and the need to center justice and not just injustice, emerge as primary areas of interest. And again, deeply informed by those that we worked with. We also have some theoretical interventions that we're interested in delving into with this project. From a socio-ecological perspective, resilience is defined as a group's ability to respond meaningfully to harm. And that being the case, then people's interest and strategies in the face of harm matter greatly. And indeed, as a part of a directive from one of our collaborators, Donna Chavis, without equity, there is no resilience. And we have institutional interests that we're engaging with this award. So how to generate transdisciplinary, cross-departmental, cross-college collaboration and community engaged research at ASU, and very much the need to not only recognize, but to institute this 4th E, equity, in the RIEEE. So all of these informed our research questions. How do local actors and community-based organizations practice resilience? How do they experience and respond to threats and promises of these highly contested bioenergy projects? Our approach is multifaceted. I'll touch on some of it here all too quickly, but first and foremost, again, building the EJ collab and generating processes and relationships for the co-production of knowledge through shared research questions that would then operationalize those guiding questions we brought to the project, shared theoretical and conceptual interest and interventions, shared strategies, expectations, and ethics for collaboration. And this is very much ongoing work. The RIEEE kind of enabled us to ignite other research funded by the Departments of Sustainable Development and Biology, in which we've been able to gather 100 samples from homes. This is from research conducted in March and just last weekend of September. These have been tested for various indicators that would indicate potential contamination, and those are accompanied with interviews and observations. Much more to say about that. But I want to respect everyone's time here, so I'm moving quickly. So the key insights from the work so far, here's a sampling. First, insights into the relationship between resiliency and justice. So resiliency as a matter of adaptation is a social ecological practice, meaning that it's also a matter of power, inequity, mutuality, responsibility, meaning making. So what are the meanings that people attach to and derive from water? And land and sovereignty, and also a matter of trust, including trust between residents and citizens and bodies like the Department of Environmental Quality, and where trust is quite low. We also have initial water quality results, thanks to colleagues Tuberty, Woods, and Babiak, and these are overall assuring, but include some indication for concern. And then as a combined hypothesis to kind of illustrate the transdisciplinary and community-informed spirit of this project, we hypothesized from points 1 and 2 that if the water quality is found to be good, and again, overwhelmingly it has been with some serious concerns, but those are limited to a few samples. We still hypothesize though that many people would still continue not to drink the water. So then why is that, and what kinds of research then do we need to answer that questions? What do we need to understand beyond what the tests themselves can show us, about people's experiences and knowledge that are informing that mistrust? Other exciting insights that I won't have time to do justice for is mapping as a process of collaboration and community engagement and co-analysis, as well as a product. Excited to talk with others here at AppState about that as well. And of course, always the need for more research, including about these knowledge contestations around the sustainability of these bioenergy projects, more on the water quality, more on mapping and meaning making. And importantly, how to sustain this meaningful collaboration. So we've learned and experienced the need for institutional support. So glad to have RIEEE taking leadership on that, and the need for changes in university of culture to support community-based research collaboration. It goes a lot of places from here. This is again a sampling of some. We've submitted some grants, have some underway. There's been some presentations. Some of these, actually many of these, have been undertaken by Dana in Taiwan. So that's been a really exciting dynamic to add to this. We take student engagement very seriously. It was a big part of the RIEEE, and we've been able to launch that further into the summer and into the semester with other funding, ongoing fieldwork, and data analysis. Important to acknowledge RIEEE. Thank you, Christine, Grace, and Caitlin, for not only enabling the research, but enabling such a rewarding process. Thank you. Thank you to our collab folks, Sherry, Danielle, Donna, Jeff, Mac, and to so many other people, again, for making this work possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Rebecca.
Hopefully I didn't speed through that too quickly.
I think you were just on time. That's a lot to fit in such, there's never enough time, but we'll have more opportunities to hear more about this work, and we in RIEEE will make more of those available. I do want to pause. We had a question, if you don't mind, but we'll maybe address it briefly and then move on to the next one. And let's see, Benjamin asked, when working with local communities, what do you do if there's lots of pushback on a project that could be incredibly beneficial? That's a big question, Benjamin. Thank you for it. But in the context of the work of this group, Rebecca or Dana or others, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I don't want to put Dana on the spot. I know it's late there, but I'll say a little bit and see if Dana would like to chime in, because she'll certainly have a lot of wisdom here. But I'd say that we would take it really seriously, and that pushback would be an indicator of something good, that it's probably an equitable relationship, and that consent is a matter that's never closed. It's always open. So we would just take that pushback seriously, step back, or asked to engage further to try to understand the pushback. But usually the pushback is coming from a place of that's quite informed. So that's what I'll start with, and I'd love to hear Dana if you're up for it, Dana.
That was a great answer. Hi, everyone, and a great question. Thank you for that. I would ask, who knows that it's beneficial, right? There's kind of an assumption in that question that we already know that we have the answers, or that we know what is beneficial as the outside experts. So if I was feeling that kind of pushback from a local community, I think I would want to slow down, and I would want to sort of check my assumptions that I know in advance what's beneficial. And I could imagine different kinds of projects, different kinds of impacts and outcomes. But I think the question is very rich, and actually pushes all of us to sort of slow down and kind of examine the role of expertise, I think, in working with communities. So what we've found a lot in this project is the partners that we're working with in Sampson County and Robeson County and across the rural coastal plains of Eastern North Carolina have a pretty clear sense of what's going on, and a pretty clear sense of what would be needed to get to justice. And so the question of beneficial really is emerging, I think, from the theoretical work and the empirical observations that they are doing on the ground. So yeah, I would want to pause and think about how we define what's beneficial and how we're sure about that.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Dana, for joining us. I know it's what, 10 p.m. or later for you in Taiwan. And thank you, Ben, for the question. That's interesting. And both the question and the answers reflect exactly why RIEEE wants to support this kind of work to examine things from all angles and perspectives. So I will share here quickly to go to our next presentation, just a brief, hopefully you all can see. So we have Hei-Young Kim, who's a research assistant in the Appalachian Energy Center. She'll be representing the award that was given to the Nexus team, which has faculty in STBE. Jeremy Farrell and Oak Yoon were both on this proposal, but the Nexus team as a whole involves others in the department as well. This group has been working on-farm biomass and other clean energy solutions to extend the growing season in Appalachia for small Appalachian farmers. And Hei-Young will tell us a bit more, and actually some other things as well. But Hei-Young will tell us about this award, and I will stop sharing mine. And Hei-Young, if you want to cue yours up.
Okay. Everybody can see that?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Hei-Young Kim, and as Grace mentioned, I've worked for Nexus Group for many years and working with Jeremy Farrell and Ogun Yu at STB department for this project. So briefly talking about Nexus project, Nexus project aims local farmer resiliency with sustainable technology, affordable sustainable technologies. So we've been especially focused on growing season extension with greenhouse technology. Since local farmers use, commonly high toner greenhouse for extended growing season, because it's cheaper, maintenance is easier, the installation cost is cheaper than other greenhouse. Yeah, you can see the picture, example of the picture, the high toner greenhouse. It's just a simple structure with a greenhouse plastic film, which is made of polyethylene. And also because of the cold spring weather in this area, like spring frost, spring freeze, and cold snap, more and more farmers who has high tunnel, they want to install heating system. So this greenhouse has a high tunnel, has a heating system. There is a picture of inside the greenhouse, inside the high tunnel. It is propane. It is propane space heater, and actually the greenhouse plastic film polyethylene has very low R value, which is not good for installation. So it loses the heat very quickly through the surface, ground, and also any gaps and cracks on this simple structure. So far, Nexus Group has successfully introduced a sustainable greenhouse heating technology like root zone heating, biomass heating, or active solar energy heating, something like that. But for this time, CONCERT grant, with the support from the CONCERT grant program, we started evaluating another sustainable technology called earth-air heat exchanger. Okay, so I want to briefly introduce what is earth-air heat exchanger system. It's called in many several ways, but I want to call it earth tube because it's easier to pronounce. Earth tube is using the relatively stable ground temperature. As you can see here, the picture on the right, it's simply buried pipe underground. So the ground temperature is relatively stable compared to the air temperature, so which means it's cooler during the summertime and warmer during the winter time. So it's sucking the air, and the sucked air flows through the underground pipe and provide the cooled or heated air inside the building. So as you can see the picture on the left side, there is the profile is underground temperature. So as going deeper underground, below the ground, the temperature fluctuation is less, which means more stable, less affected by solar energy. So this is very good system, easy and simple, easier maintenance and very sustainable. But there is a question, because it really depends on, its design and the soil type of the location, and also the climate of the location. And it's not very commonly used for studied for the high tunnel greenhouse, which has very low R value. So we wanted to evaluate this system for the high tunnel greenhouse in this, especially in this high country region. So our main project goal is investigate the feasibility of earth air heat exchanger system for high tunnel greenhouse in the high country area. And we propose to study regional parameters that provide fundamental information in designing on earth tube systems, such as local soil properties and ground temperature, things like that. And secondly, we want to develop a simple modeling tool to estimate earth tube performance and provide simple design of earth tube system for high tunnel greenhouses. So we set the 3 research questions. First, does the soil at the greenhouse, Nexus greenhouse, which is located at the Watauga landfill, that greenhouse soil has a good thermal properties for earth tube system? The second question is, how does the ground temperature behave as a function of depth and the location, and also inside and outside of the greenhouse? And the last question is, what are the tubing length, layout, and air velocity that achieve a desired level of heat transfer effectiveness for the earth tube system for Nexus greenhouse? And also, what is the resulting monthly mean temperature of the air leaving the outlet of the earth tube system? Those are our three research questions, and our methodology is: first, we conduct a soil study about the soil summer properties and the ground Nexus soil ground temperature by modeling and actual measurement. And with those parameters, we can develop a heat exchanger modeling tool. So that is our second step. So developing a simple modeling tool using the parameter from the first step, first the soil study, and then find out that, earth tube system for the Nexus greenhouse is good or not. So we conducted soil analysis. So there are, we focused on the soil thermal conductivity and the soil heat capacity and the soil diffusivity. So first, the soil conductivity is, can be learned by this analyzer, just measuring the conductivity at the site and at the lab. And also then the heat capacity can be calculated with the conductivity and moisture contents, things like that. And finally, we can get a soil diffusivity. Soil diffusivity is simply like conductivity over heat capacity. So this is a very important factor to model the underground temperature. So it's better to have the smaller number of soil diffusivity, which means the ground temperature doesn't fluctuate much by air temperature or solar energy. So as a result, we got a number on the table 1. You can see the soil nexus soil diffusivity. The average is 0.048. It looks okay. It looks good. It's less than average soil diffusivity, which is good indicator for the earth tube system. And another result we have here, using that soil diffusivity, I model nexus ground temperature. The left one is ground temperature for the outside of the greenhouse. The chart on the right is ground temperature for the inside the greenhouse, which you can see here. The green line is the air temperature, and the blue line is the blue line, yellow line, and other lines is for the underground temperature. And you can see here the depth below underground, like 4 meters below the ground, it's getting flattened. You can see here on the right, it's getting flattened. The yellow, not yellow, orange one, orange line getting very flattened, which means it's good for earth tube system. So that is actually modeling for the annual temperature profile, but we actually wanted to measure the ground temperature. So we installed a multi-depth temperature sensor actually under the ground, inside the greenhouse and outside the greenhouse. So you can see here on the right picture, this is the sensor, the multi-depth sensor post we built, that we installed the inside and the outside the greenhouse. So you can see the number on the screen. So you can see the 87.667 for the inside the air, greenhouse inside air temperature. On the 4 feet below, which is on the screen, 4 feet below, it's just 63.87, which is about, it's more than 20, above 25 degree Fahrenheit, you know, cooler underground.
Hei-Young, I want to just give a little time check that you're at about 10 minutes.
Okay, I see. So next, I'm gonna skip the very last charts then. And based on the temperature profile, we developed the heat transfer modeling tool, and with a sample of PVC 4-inch type examples, we got a very good number. You can see on the screen on the right, there is a number effectiveness. It's a point, which is 84%, which seems good. Usually people say that above 80% is a good number, so which is good. And as you can see on the very top, during the summertime, we can get inside the greenhouse temperature or around 20 degrees Celsius. When it's very hot outside, like incoming air temperature is 27, but still inside the greenhouse, we can keep 20, around 20. And for the summer and for the winter, which is heating mode, when it's outside, it's below, -5 degrees Celsius, we can keep the inside the greenhouse is positive number, like 1.3 degrees Celsius, which looks feasible. But actually for this design, we need like a 15 meter PVC pipe, like a 30 of them. So it seems a lot. So we have to make a decision by cost, benefit analysis. So next step, we're gonna validate the modeling tool with the RIEEE gas system, which is built at Blackburn Farm. So with the RIEEE data number from them, we're gonna validate the tool, the modeling tool for the Nexus greenhouse, and then finally we can design the earth tube system for the Nexus greenhouse. That's our next plan. And finally, we can conduct the economy feasibility study. And if it seems feasible, we can install the system with some external or internal funding source. That's all I have today.
Excellent. Thank you, Hei-Young.
So
We
kind of, I speak so late, so it's kind of delayed.
I want to hold questions for Hei-Young until the end if we have time, and be sure we have give sufficient time to the last two presenters today. So if you don't mind to hang in with us, Hei-Young, until the end, there might be some questions for you too. And I also invite, if you haven't already, I don't see any yet, but any questions that we can send to presenters after the fact or at the end of the presentations today into the Google Doc that I've shared in the chat. So our next presenter is Gregg Marland. Gregg represents an award that Dennis Gilfillan, who's no longer with Appalachian, he was a postdoc here in RIEEE, and Jeff Colby, who's in geography and planning. This is one branch of the Appalachian Carbon Research Group, which has been a pretty active group here on campus and involves some others in other departments that weren't part of this particular award. But without further ado, I will sorry, Gregg, I didn't introduce you. Gregg is a research professor with a joint appointment in the Geological and Environmental Sciences Department and in RIEEE. I'm fortunate enough to share a wall with Gregg and have for a while. So Gregg, I will turn the mic over to you and I will share your slides here. Just a moment.
Am I here? Am I here? Can you hear me?
I think you're here. Okay. Okay, I think we have Gregg's slides up and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks, Gregg.
Okay, let me start by saying I get to talk today, but if you want to know who did the work, it's the first four people on this slide. Jeff and I have been working with a very fine group of students to push some of these projects along. And in this list, the students, the second and third, Katie and Caroline, have been, their participation in this project has been supported by the RIEEE grant. So we're grateful for that. And the two contributors at the bottom are students who were here in the previous year and helped set up the framework for what we were trying to do. The title is The Coupling of Climate Resilience and CO2 Emissions per Unit of Value Added. And the next slide, Grace. The essence of this really is that we're interested, well, as I think most of you know, the United Nations has created a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 targets and 232 unique indicators. But we're interested in climate change, particularly in our projects, but we're interested in the interrelationships. If you start to get into these goals and some of the objectives, some of them are conflicting in what you might do to pursue those goals, and some of them are complementary. So what are the relationships between the different UN goals and indicators? And in starting this, in the previous year's study, basically we focused on this indicator 9.4.1 as a place to start. And the indicator 9.4.1 is CO2 emissions per unit of value. How much CO2 additions do you get in terms of the economic activity. And presumably one would like to see 9.4.1 decreasing as we are getting the same economic activity or growth in economic activity, but less CO2 emissions. These are measured in tons of carbon per $1 million, or if you want to go to a UN website, you can find national values in kilograms of CO2 per dollar. But we're trying to look at not absolute values, but trends and patterns. So the next slide. And what we've done in this particular initiative is to take the different patterns and change of 9.4.1 and put it into 4 groups. And in this diagram, the 8 groups, sorry, this diagram shows the way we've divided it up. CO2 is increasing upward, GDP is increasing horizontally. And in case 2, for example, economic growth is continuing, but CO2 emissions are decreasing. In case 4, economic activity is increasing while CO2 is increasing as well. So we've taken these, try to classify first countries and then states, and then subdivide what is the regional breakdown, what's happening. The interest in the students is really comes into issues of equity and fairness and patterns. Is everybody sharing equally in the burden of reducing emissions? Who's going to be suffering the greatest as the climate changes? Who's going to be subjecting us to this by increasing CO2 emissions? So we've divided things into these 8 cases. And the next slide begins to, we begin basically at a global level, but I'm going to take you down to the county level and see what's happening. But at the global level, and these are greenhouse or CO2 emissions on the left graph and global GDP increasing on the right graph. And the graphs are for different periods of time, beginning in 1990 through 2015. And just at this very gross level, it's apparent that the CO2 emissions are not growing in the same places and at the same rates as the GDP. In particular, the CO2 emissions are growing very rapidly, and these are latitudinal bands all the way around the Earth. And you can see that in the latitudinal band that includes China and the US, here it's say at 30 degrees north. I keep trying to point with my finger. At 30 degrees north, both CO2 and GDP are increasing. So this is with the resolution, and this is our data set. And the next graph shows at a 1 degree by 1 degree latitude, longitude, where is CO2 per GDP increasing and where is it decreasing? The pink areas are areas where the CO2 per GDP is increasing over that time period from 1990 to 2015. The green areas, CO2 per GDP has been decreasing, and you can envision from this what I should have the latitudinal bands label on this, but we'll get that in the next round. Next figure. The design of these UN goals was really designed at the national level. And if you go to the UN website, you'll find CO2 per GDP by country. But if you look at the US by state, you find some very striking differences. The blues here are all areas where GDP has been increasing over this time period. And the couple of small colors in yellow or orange are places where GDP has been decreasing. The darkest blue is where CO2 has been increasing or decreasing while GDP is increasing. And that's more true as it gets darker blue. This is state level data. We've taken some emissions data and broken this down at the county level in the next slide. And what you see at the county level is incredible mix of values, where we have the national level this feeling that CO2 per GDP is decreasing. That is not true everywhere, and it is very different. And these are all 8 cases, as you can tell. Again, the blues are cases where the economy is growing. And in cases 1 and 2, the economy is growing and the CO2 is decreasing. So we're just getting into the point in this analysis of trying to distinguish. We're going to separate urban versus rural, for example. We're starting to impose population and population movement on this. We're starting to worry about which are the areas are which are going to be most affected by climate change. Is the climate change going to be most impacting the people who are putting out the largest emissions? What are the motivations on the basis of these for different areas to reduce emissions? And I think there's one more slide. Nope, two more. This is the number of counties. It's a little hard to sort through visually that previous slide. So this is the number of counties and the different cases 1 through 8. And you'll see here that the largest number of cases is case 2. And case 2 is the case where CO2 is decreasing, but GDP is increasing. So that's the right idea. And here, yeah, final slide is good. And we've started to take then by sector, where are the CO2 coming from by the different cases. And the first 2 bars are the case 1 counties in 2010 and 2015. The biggest thing you'll see in the change from CO2 emissions from 2010 to 2015 is a decrease in emissions from electric power generation. And it's a dominant thing in case 1. Again, case 1 is one where GDP is increasing, but CO2 is decreasing. Cases 5 and 6, very obviously, are counties in which there is less population. The dominant emissions are from on-road transport. But we're just in the stage of really trying to sort out and attribute again who's causing the problems or what's causing the problems. Where is it occurring? Are those same people are the ones that are most suffering? Interestingly, of course, the dominant thing through all of this is that intermediate green, which is electric power generation. And electric power generation, the electricity is not used in the same places as it's being generated. So we have to sort out electrical generation and large industrial sources, where it's produced, where the CO2 emissions come from, and where the benefit is really achieved. So there's a lot yet to be done. Again, we're going off into this. The main story here is that doing these things at the national level doesn't tell the story. If you really want to know what's going on, we have to dig into a finer geographic scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregg. You just managed to condense a very complex effort into the allotted time. That was pretty remarkable. And I know that this is a preliminary evaluation. You were starting to try to apply some of the data that you use in other contexts and ask new questions. And it's really neat to see the progress you've made. We do have another question here from Benjamin, again, which I think is would be neat for you to speak to a minute if you can. So he's asking, would it be possible for this research to take into account how various pollutants can affect neighboring countries? So this flow of pollutants geographically, I know that you're doing some work on that. So if you wouldn't mind to speak to that for a minute. Thanks, Benjamin, for the question.
The interesting thing about CO2 is that it's it's long lived and mixed into the atmosphere. And so that as far as the CO2 is concerned, it really doesn't matter where it goes up. If it goes up in China or it goes up in the US, it has the same effect globally. It takes time for it to mix from the northern hemisphere into the southern hemisphere, but it does get mixed in the atmosphere. But on the other hand, if we're generating CO2 from a power plant, it isn't just CO2 that's being generated. It's all other mix of pollutants. So there are downstream effects, and there is some efforts now to measure CO2 from satellite-based instruments, and it is starting to be successful. And you can identify individual power plants often on satellite measurements of atmospheric CO2. And it can be used as a tracer to do other things. And conversely, sometimes you can find, if you measure some other gases in the atmosphere, you can go back and find out where the CO2 is coming from by tracking back other things. So we're collaborating very closely with a young man who is part of the Japanese space program, and also the US space program. And he's working with us on a lot of these things.
Excellent. Thank you, Gregg. And I'll remind again that if you have some follow-up questions, we're more than happy to share those with presenters. If you want to tag your email address, or if you want to add your email address in the Google Doc, we'll try to get a response for you if you have a question you'd like follow up on. So all right, I want to move. Thank you, Gregg. Appreciate the time this morning. I want to move on to our last presentation. Sandi Lane in Nutrition and Healthcare Management and Adam Hege in Health and Exercise Science, both in the College of Health Sciences, will represent this group. This was one of the larger teams that we supported, and I think some of the others are here. Maggie Sugg in Geography and Planning, Lakshmi Iyer in the College of Business, and Trent Spalding in Nutrition and Healthcare Management. And this was the one I mentioned earlier that was also co-funded by the Institute for Health and Human Services and the Beaver College of Health Sciences. So we are excited about that co-funding and reaching across the groups here across campus to support some really interesting work. So this group is working on nursing home resilience, and they were very timely with putting a proposal both for CONCERT and some other sources of funds to look at this dynamic in the context of COVID-19. So very, very ripe inquiry right now. So I will turn the mic over to Sandi and Adam, and I'm going to share your slides here. So let me stop share. And let's see, do we have Sandi and Adam? Are you both back on? I know they had to jump out and go to a accreditation meeting, so we have back. Okay, excellent. Okay. I think we're on. Here we go.
Great, thanks. And I thank the RIEEE and the Institute for Health and Human Services for their support of our ongoing research related to nursing home quality of care, disaster preparedness, and then in our current disaster or pandemic, COVID-19. So next slide, please. So the motivation for our study really focused on the fact that so many of our residents were harmed by COVID-19 in 2020. And we've got, a small percent of the population that actually lives in nursing homes. And there's about 15,000 across the United States in every state. And so with so many of our residents and staff members harmed by COVID-19, it alarmed much of the country, including myself as an administrator. And why these folks are so susceptible to any type of infection, but especially one that was so unknown early on in 2020, is because of their conditions in terms of their clinical needs. They tend to be one of our most fragile populations. They live in a small room, oftentimes 2 or 3 residents per room with little more than 5 or 6 feet between the beds. They need a lot of hands-on high care, a lot of hands-on care. So they're in a position where the staff come and go, and if there's not enough PPE, the challenge is great for them to stay healthy. In North Carolina alone, in December of 2020, there were over 17,000 cases and 2,000 deaths in nursing homes. And that resulted in about 4.9% of the cases and 38% of the deaths in North Carolina alone. And some of the early media and some of the research reports indicated that nursing homes that have more staff shortages and more survey deficiencies have a larger number of staff and residents who are positive for COVID-19. Staff shortages is not new. It's been problematic for decades. So it was exacerbated and compounded by this pandemic. We wanted to find out if resilience, that ability to survive and thrive, had something to do with the fact that some facilities were better able to protect their residents than others. So that's kind of where we came up with this resilience perspective as a means of why an outbreak occurred and then a spread within the facilities. Next slide, please. So we used national level data, the Center for Medicare Medicaid Services, MDS data, which is a resident assessment tool that's a national requirement. We used the COVID-19 data that nursing homes were required to report. And then we used census data from 2010 and then the 5-year estimates. And then we used the county level COVID infection rates from USA Facts. In addition to that, we had 2 surveys, one that was sent out via social media through our contacts and used snowball sampling, and that was the Health Belief Model Survey. And that went out to all of our contacts and asked them to resend it out. And we did very well, except some of our surveys came from California, so they got way out of hand, but that's okay. Adam will tell you more there. And then the benchmark resilience tool, which is a 13-item tool developed in New Zealand. It's been around for probably going on 15 years now. And we sent that out through our collaborators in the long-term care network and then the public health folks. We were very fortunate to have a diverse set of students help us with this research, and it was really valuable to have their contribution to our work. So we had data analytics students, we had public health students, healthcare management students, and they did a variety of tasks, from creating a matrix to obtaining the data sets to working with the survey results and Qualtrics and some initial descriptive statistics. And we're very happy to be able to report that we have a dashboard that's specific to nursing home COVID, and it's a national dashboard created by one of our data analytics students. Next slide.
Okay, so the next couple slides, I'm going to talk about some of our preliminary work and talk about how we've answered some of our questions. So one of our first questions with this study was really understand what are some of those social vulnerabilities that are already there. So the state of North Carolina has been doing a really good job of collecting this data that can show us where places across the state are most vulnerable. Maybe they have the resources, capacity to address changing conditions, all of those types of things. So this map here, Maggie helped to create, and this just shows some of the vulnerable places across our state. And this was done back in the period of March, April. So we do want to talk about that a little bit in terms of when our data was collected, when we were doing a lot of this was during a period when vaccines were being rolled out, things were starting to change. At that point, if you remember, things were starting to look a lot better. And since that period, we've started to see this uptick in cases and some of those types of things. So, but this gives us a good starting point to work from. So next slide, please. So as a public health researcher, I'm really interested in how health beliefs, which are shaped by opinions, attitudes, knowledge, how all of those kind of factors kind of shape how people behave. COVID-19 has a lot of behavioral aspects involved when we think about people's vaccination thoughts, people's prevention behaviors when it comes to mask wearing, distancing. And so we used some secondary data to begin with, but then we also did primary data collection, as Sandi mentioned. And so our survey, one of our surveys focused on how health beliefs might influence the spread of COVID-19. So we developed a survey using the commonly used health belief model, widely used in psychology, public health world. It also has some, was informed some by the theory of reasoned action in terms of how people's attitudes, behaviors lead to actual action. We sent this survey out widely in the March-April period. We sent it to North Carolina, but we also sent it out more widely. But this particular study, we're focusing on North Carolina. So just some preliminary results to give you all. You can see here how many citizens in North Carolina we had involved. You can see people responded if they had tested positive for COVID-19, how many people they had known. So we asked people, have you known anyone? At least 5 people, 10 people, all of those types of things. Around half of people viewed things like mask wearing, social distancing, vaccination as a social responsibility, whereas the other half tended to view things as a personal choice or even an inappropriate requirement. We see that 3/4 of folks were actually participating in the recommended behaviors. There was a lot of distrust, but people at that time period when we conducted the survey were trusting the CDC and local health departments primarily. You can see here we provide sources of information that people were getting their information at that time. And then we also had asked some questions about vaccination, if they were intending to get vaccinated, if they had been vaccinated, and those sorts of questions. So you can go to next slide.
So this map shows the results of the resilience survey. And so the 13 questions, we created an average for each respondent, each long-term care provider. And that average resilience rate is what's mapped here in according to their zip code, because we collected the zip code for the organization. And as you can see, the darker color is the individual facility that perceive themselves as more resilient than those of the lighter colors. We still want to do some analysis with this, but this kind of tells us an idea that there is a difference across the state. We do know that there's a difference between the public health responses and the long-term care provider responses in terms of feeling more resilience. That may be due to the requirement for long-term care organizations to have a disaster preparedness plan and have infection control protocols. We'll have to investigate that further. But the 3 resilient questions that they felt most strongly about or felt that they were most resilient had to do with good leadership in their organization. If they were struck by a crisis, that the people in the organizations were committed to working on a problem until it was resolved, and that they proactively monitored their industry for early warning signs of change, which of course resilience requires that ability to monitor your environment and monitor your internal organization. So we look forward to further investigating this aspect of resilience in our state in terms of our long-term care folks and our public health folks. Next slide.
Okay, so I'll wrap us up here just with building on what Sandi just said in terms of future research that we want to do with this moving forward. We really want to dive into the data more and look at some predictive analytics that we can look at in terms of health belief models. How do health beliefs influence COVID-19 rates? How does it impact nursing homes at the same time? So compiling all this data together to try to answer some of these questions. As Sandi also mentioned, understanding organizational resilience and how it can factor into this. Also, new data has become available. We are tracking vaccination data a lot more, and CMS at the federal level is tracking vaccination data, so we can start to look at vaccination data in relation to these questions. And then ultimately, Sandi mentioned earlier that nursing homes, public health agencies as well are dealing with some staff shortages during a crisis like this, people leaving the workforce, those types of challenges are happening. So how could that be impacting things? And all of these can kind of help us moving forward for future crises and those types of things. So we'll stop right there and answer any questions everyone has.
Thank you, Adam and Sandi.
I had asked Lakshmi to put the website for the dashboard in the chat. So
I just did send it.
Yes, that's great. So any of you interested in to see that great work, the website's in the chat. And of course, Lakshmi would love to talk more about that. And I know we're probably out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time, but this is a work in progress. That's a prototype, and we are kind of revising it as we speak, and then we will have the stakeholder groups also evaluate and provide us feedback. So basically, we're using kind of a design science approach to come up with a kind of a decision support dashboard for stakeholders involved in this. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. And Meg, I see your question. If we could, we have just a few minutes here. We're actually going to hopefully land just in time. But Meg asked if survey respondents were all long-term care facility administrators. There were over 400 respondents and wondered how many organizations are reflected in the responses. Good question. Thank you, Meg.
That's the health belief model, right, Adam?
Yeah, so the health belief model, we had over 300, and it ended up being over 360 North Carolina citizens responded to that survey. The resilience survey that we sent to nursing homes, nursing care facilities, public health agencies, we had close to 150 respondents for that. And that included people that were administrators, but it also included staff members.
Senior leaders.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, of those, we had more, about half of them were nursing homes, and the other percentages were smaller percentages of assisted living, senior care, and public health.
Great. Thank you. Well, we are just a few minutes. I should not be surprised, so much interesting work and complexity in all of these projects that it would be difficult to fit in an hour and a half. So we're just a couple minutes away from our hour, but I wanted to share, first, thank all the presenters. Thank you all for making some time this morning to share an update on your work. We look forward to more going forward and supporting you all with the new things that RIEEE is developing in particular, but thank you for making some time on a Friday morning. I also want to thank Katie for being a last minute help on tech support this morning because we had a double booking. But I wanted to just take a quick minute here and share a couple of things coming up with RIEEE. Especially for the faculty that are on the call this morning, faculty and staff across campus, that we're rolling out a seminar series. The first one's just going to be an introduction to RIEEE, a reintroduction basically, and what we have in mind. Some of you have heard this in other contexts already, but wanted to put that out there. Especially invite you to the working group session on Tuesday, the 28th. So this is really an opportunity for us to share with you how we're thinking about framing and delivering, organizing the kind of research development support that we intend to develop over the next year or so. So to give us some feedback on that, to give us some ideas about the things that might be most valuable to you all. And we have 2 sessions. We're working toward an NSF campus cyber infrastructure proposal with the Office of Research and IT. And we will hold 2 focus groups in early November. So I just wanted to put a plug in for that. Keep in mind, these are meant to discern the kind of research drivers of campus cyber infrastructure needs. So please join us for that in the working group session, and then invite you again to reach out to us, Christine and myself and anyone else here. We are all in our new offices in Peacock Hall. We don't have all of them in this office range, but we're on the first floor in 1111 through 1129. We also converted our contact list into a Google group, so you can hear more, keep in touch with us that way as well. And the wrap up of the Research and Creative Activity Week here at Appalachian is at 1 p.m. today. The Chancellor's and Provost Awards for Excellence in Research and Scholarship and Creative Activity will be given. And Katie, if you're still on, I wanted to confirm that has it gone virtual now, or is it hybrid?
Yes, it's all virtual. So the Zoom link is in the calendar for the program of events on our event website, which I'll include in the chat in just a second. And yes, it's all virtual. So everybody will just log in via a link. We do have some live presentations given by one of the awardees and some pre-recorded comments from the chancellor and from one of our awardees who is currently on a Fulbright abroad, so can't join us live. So please join us for that. We're really excited about these awardees, and yeah, we'd love to see you there.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining today, for presenting, for helping out, and for all the great work that's happening here. This has been a really fun morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.